my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
Period of parole eligibility is 15 years plus 25 years of life in accordance with Penal Code Section 12022. 3B. This is to be concurrent.
It's kind of funny. It's not funny, is it?
No more, it's not.
No.
It's what the judge ordered, so that's what it is. It is what it is.
But Lindsay actually grinned when the judge read his ruling. The lack of remorse not lost on David Crawford's daughter.
This is Nicholas Lindsay. Lindsay has been given a life sentence for the third time for the murder of St. Petersburg police officer David Crawford in 2011. Pinellas Pasco Circuit Judge Thane Covert issued a 26-page ruling explaining why he believes Lindsay, who is 21 years old, should spend the remainder of his life in prison. The ruling was delivered during a hearing on Friday, which was attended by many police officers as well as Crawford's family and friends.
Lindsay received his first life sentence last year, but then the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to put a juvenile in prison for life without parole without it.
Lindsay, who was 16 years old when the murder occurred, has the opportunity to have his sentence reconsidered after 25 years due to updated criteria for sentencing juveniles. Last week, Lindsay's lawyers presented their case to Judge Covert, arguing that his sentence should be reduced to 40 years. They based their argument on a new law enacted by the legislature in response to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, which declared that mandatory life sentences for juveniles violated constitutional safeguards against cruel and unusual punishment.
The court has significant doubts about the defendant's potential for rehabilitation.
Lindsay was convicted of first-degree murder by a jury in 2012, and Judge Covert imposed a life sentence without the possibility of parole, as it was the only legal punishment allowed at that time. However, the Supreme Court later ruled that mandatory life sentences for young offenders were unconstitutional, and courts should consider mitigating factors. In 2013, Lindsay had a hearing to review his sentence, and once again, Judge Covert sentenced him to life in prison.
I would give my life for Austin. I loved him a lot.
This is Dylan Shoemaker. It's not uncommon for babies to be called little monsters, and their constant crying can be quite bothersome. 17-year-old Shoemaker, like many others, found it challenging to tolerate such a persistent cry. He was entrusted with the task of babysitting Austin, his teenage girlfriend's nearly 2-year-old baby, who was just a few days shy of his second birthday. Unfortunately, the baby's relentless crying pushed Shoemaker over the edge. At that time, Shoemaker was living in the same house as his girlfriend and her parents. He had been asked to take care of the baby while his girlfriend went to work her night shift. It's important to note that neither Austin nor the 3-month-old baby brother, whom Shoemaker claimed he didn't want to disturb with Austin's cries, were his own children.
Actually, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean.
During the trial, Shoemaker confessed that he grew increasingly frustrated with the baby and resorted to physically harming him. He admitted to spanking, slapping, and forcefully slamming the baby onto the floor. Shockingly, he also acknowledged punching the baby multiple times in the head while using a pillow as a barrier. As a result of these horrific acts, Austin suffered severe head injuries that led to bleeding in the brain, ultimately resulting in his death. Shoemaker faced serious legal consequences, being charged with second-degree murder and child abuse. Prior to the sentencing, Supreme Court Justice M. Williams Bowler remained unaffected by Shoemaker's tears and reminded him of a phone call he had made to his mother, which likely held significance in the case.
Will show that you admitted that on July 23, 2013, in a phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I got a quote from the court reporter, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me," end quote.
The judge strongly condemned the manipulation and deceit demonstrated by the individual and wasted no time in imposing the harshest possible sentence, 25 years to life in prison.
Jury would convict her on a lesser charge, perhaps accessory to murder or manslaughter. Now, though, she'll spend the rest of her life behind bars for the murder of Shannon.
This is Jennifer Mee. She gained widespread attention on the internet due to videos of her experiencing uncontrollable hiccups. These hiccups were so frequent that she hiccuped around 50 times every minute, earning her the nickname the Hiccup Girl. Determined to find a cure, Jennifer searched far and wide and made appearances on various TV shows, including multiple appearances on NBC's Today Show. Her unique health condition turned her into a celebrity, with national media outlets eagerly seeking her presence.
First, it's kind of funny. It's not funny, is
Not
it?
no more,
anymore?
it's not.
No.
After trying numerous products that claimed to cure her hiccups without success, Jennifer Mee eventually found relief when Dr. Bob Lynn treated and successfully cured her famous hiccup condition. As a result, she was no longer known as the Hiccup Girl, and her popularity gradually faded away. Following these events, it's unclear what motivated Jennifer, but reports suggest that she ran away from home and began dating a man named Lamont Newton. Together, they devised a scheme to scam and rob victims online. To execute their plan, they enlisted the help of another individual named Lauren Rayford. In 2010, their target became Shannon Griffin, who fell into their trap. At the age of 19, Jennifer lured Griffin to the house where she resided with Newton and Rayford. Once there, they proceeded to rob him and tragically ended up shooting him 4 times, resulting in his death. Although the police were unable to determine which of the 3 suspects was responsible for the fatal shots, all of them were apprehended and charged with murder. Law enforcement officials stated that Jennifer Mee and her accomplices admitted to the crime. During the trial, a recorded phone call between Jennifer and her mother was played as evidence.
I have a free call from
Jennifer Mee. I got charged for murder in the first degree.
Charged for murder in the first degree?
Yes, sir.
What who did you kill?
I didn't do nothing. I was just there at the wrong time, at the wrong place.
In 2013, Mee was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence in prison with no possibility of parole. Similarly, her accomplices, Newton and Rayford, were also given life sentences without the chance of parole. Upon hearing her sentence, Mee couldn't hold back her emotions and broke down in tears.
Down in court today, banging his head on a table after a judge sentenced him to life in prison. The shooting triggered the university to boost security in and around campus.
This is Brandon Spencer. When Brandon was 19 years old, he opened fire into a crowd of people. Fortunately, no one lost their life, but his actions resulted in injuries to 4 individuals. As a consequence, he faced charges for 4 counts of attempted murder. The incident occurred during a crowded Halloween party held on the University of Southern California campus in Los Angeles back in 2012. Chaos ensued when gunshots rang out, prompting a police investigation that swiftly led them to Spencer. Spencer was known to be associated with a gang and held a belief that rival gang members were responsible for shooting him in a previous incident. His defense attorneys argued in court that Spencer fired his weapon as a means to deter those rival gang members whom he believed were pursuing him. Interestingly, one of the young men suspected of shooting Spencer in the stomach in 2011 happened to be among those individuals injured by Spencer's shots during the Halloween party. During the trial, several people vouched for Spencer's good behavior, including an officer from the Los Angeles Police Department. His defense team also highlighted the fact that he had no prior criminal record. However, the prosecution contended that Spencer's involvement in gang activities and access to firearms were detrimental factors. They argued that by shooting into a crowd, he displayed a willingness to cause harm, potentially leading to someone's death.
What happened here on his butt? He's life in prison. And I'm not a bad person, but I made mistakes. But I'm not just some gangbanger that she tried to betray me.
When Brandon Spencer received his sentence of 40 years in prison from Judge Edmund Clark Jr. of the Los Angeles Superior Court, he maintained his innocence. Overwhelmed with emotion, Spencer began to cry and even hit his head on the table in frustration.
Parole eligibility is 15 years plus 25 years of life in accordance with Penal Code Section 12022, 3D. This is to be concurrent with.
In June 2008, a distressing discovery was made when Travis Alexander's friends called 911 upon finding his lifeless body in his bathroom. Alexander had suffered a gunshot wound to the forehead, approximately 30 stab wounds, and his throat had been slit from one ear to the other. During their conversation with the police, the friends mentioned Jodi Arias as Alexander's girlfriend at the time. About a month later, Jodi Arias was taken into custody under suspicion of committing first-degree murder against her deceased boyfriend. The subsequent trial and investigation stretched over a span of more than 5 years, during which Arias provided various testimonies about the events that unfolded on that fateful day. Each version she shared depicted different scenarios of what potentially occurred.
He had his head down. That's what you said, right?
He was like I can just describe it as like a linebacker unless I get up and act it out, which I would like to not do, if possible.
Then do it. Go ahead. Show us how he was standing immediately before, or how he was sitting or crouching immediately before this.
Initially, Jodi Arias entered a plea of not guilty, vehemently denying any involvement in Travis Alexander's death during a public interview with the press. However, her narrative started to shift as time went on. She eventually admitted to being present during what she claimed was a home invasion that resulted in the tragic murder. Subsequently, she altered her story once again, this time asserting that she acted in self-defense, although she professed to having no recollection of stabbing Alexander. As part of her defense, she presented private letters as evidence of past sexual abuse inflicted by an ex-boyfriend. She even took the stand in court, acting as her own witness in an attempt to support her theory. On the other hand, prosecutors argued that Alexander was the one defending himself until his body could no longer resist the onslaught. Convinced of her guilt in committing this heinous crime, the jury deemed her eligible for the death penalty. However, the judge ultimately sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The court finds the mitigation presented is not sufficiently substantial to call for leniency and that a natural life sentence is appropriate. It is ordered the defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
This is Kaylee Juga, who was just 15 years old at the time, and her mother, Stephanie Huga. The mother and daughter had been making plans for a family camping trip, unaware that their lives were about to be tragically disrupted. Weeks prior to the incident, Kaylee had ended her relationship with her boyfriend, Martise Fuller, and on that fateful day, she was in her room listening to music. Heartbreaks and breakups are experiences many people have to face, and while some may try creative ways to win back their partner's affection or heal their own broken hearts, Fuller had a different plan in mind. Feeling resentful and blaming Kaylee for his own troubles, Fuller took drastic measures. After being expelled from school and being prohibited from the football team on May 9, 2019, he sneaked into Kaylee's room armed with a handgun. As someone who had been a frequent visitor to the house, Fuller was familiar with the layout. Once inside Kaylee's room, the 15-year-old Fuller shot her 5 times. Hearing the sound of gunshots, Kaylee's mother rushed to investigate the commotion. However, Fuller turned his weapon on Stephanie, shooting her twice before fleeing the scene. Thankfully, Stephanie survived the attack. Fuller was subsequently arrested and faced charges of murder, attempted murder, and burglary. Throughout the trial, he maintained his innocence, despite the police discovering that the gun he had given to a relative to dispose of matched the weapon used in the crime. Testimony from Kaylee's mother, who witnessed the incident, further supported the prosecution's case.
Shot. I stopped in my doorway and I looked at him and I said, "Oh my God, Martise." I said, "Please, you don't have to do this." And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, I."
When it was Fuller's turn to speak in court, he continued to assert his innocence and placed blame on the media, claiming that they had unfairly portrayed him in a negative light. Fuller received a life sentence in prison without the chance of parole. When the judge delivered the sentence, he displayed no signs of remorse or guilt. This is Shondell Jackson, born in February of 1991. His life took a tragic turn on July 6, 2009. On that day, he was walking on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with his friend Derek Thomas, who was 20 years old. They encountered a fellow student, Nathan Potter, who was heading towards his River West apartment, just a short distance from the campus. Nathan, a talented and beloved 21-year-old senior at the university, had a bright future ahead of him. However, everything changed when he crossed paths with Shondell and Derek. Shondell and Derek had planned to rob Nathan. They approached him, brandishing a gun and demanding that he hand over his money. Despite Nathan's insistence that he had none to give, Shondell callously shot and killed him. Both men would eventually face the consequences of their cowardly and heartless act. Shondell was apprehended, and his case went to trial. Throughout the entire legal proceedings, he displayed a complete lack of remorse for his actions and showed no sympathy towards Nathan's devastated family. Witnesses even reported seeing him smirk and make gestures towards them in a contemptuous manner. There were instances where he unabashedly smiled at them. During the trial, Nathan's mother, Denise, bravely addressed the judge, acknowledging the true evilness of her son's killer.
Shondell is in court, looking at us, swearing at us, and smiling.
Nathan's father, James Potter, spoke before the court as he delivered a victim impact statement.
That can be said to bring back our Nathan. But your sentence can ensure that Shondell does not have the opportunity as a free man to inflict pain like this again. Is there such thing as pure evil? We think so.
Shondell was convicted of first-degree murder and robbery charges. He received his sentence at the age of 19. The judge who oversaw the case expressed the belief that if Shondell were ever released, he would pose a significant danger to the public and could potentially commit another deadly act.
Of caring of human life and the need to protect the community, which I also fear for with Mr. Jackson being out in the community. I am going to go ahead on count 1, the first-degree intentional homicide conviction, and I am going to sentence Mr. Jackson to life imprisonment without possibility for extended supervision.
At that moment, Shondell swiftly glanced behind him, seemingly to direct a hostile gaze towards the victim's family. A female officer reacted by gripping his head and attempting to make him face forward towards the judge, but he resisted her efforts, displaying an expression filled with intense hatred. In the background, the sound of sobbing could be heard, though it was uncertain whether the sobbing came from Shondell's side or from Nathan's loved ones. As all of this unfolded, Nathan's parents and his younger sister clung to one another, their faces stained with tears, silently expressing their anguish. Amidst the emotional scene, the judge made an effort to proceed with delivering the sentencing.
Know that that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases, and I believe that this case rises to that level.
The female officer faced difficulty in preventing Shondell from glancing at the victim's family, prompting a male officer to step in and provide assistance. As the sobbing within the courtroom grew louder, the background noise included the sound of moaning, presumably from one of Shondell's relatives. As the officers persisted in their efforts to restore order in the courtroom, a voice from an unseen individual erupted in a piercing scream, shouting, "No!" at the top of their lungs. This single event seemed to be the breaking point for Shondell as he stood up and fiercely resisted the two officers. A suited lawyer came forward to assist them in subduing him. Shondell put up a strong fight, causing the wooden table in front of him to be pushed away. With the help of additional officers and reportedly the use of pepper spray, they eventually managed to bring Shondell down to the ground. Throughout this chaotic scene, there was a backdrop of crying, including the audible words of encouragement and support from Shondell's own family. After some time, the officers successfully regained control over Shondell and helped him to his feet. They swiftly handcuffed him and escorted him out of the courtroom, encountering continued resistance from him. At one point, an officer had to grasp the back of his head to maintain control. Just before he was taken out of the door, the sorrowful wails of a woman could be heard in the background, likely Shondell's mother. Inside the courtroom, it appeared that she held the belief that the responsibility for Shondell's sentencing lay with them. Following the sentencing, an interview was conducted with Nathan's mother, who expressed the emotional toll the situation had taken. She shared how deeply frightened Nathan's younger sister had been to enter the courtroom that day and be in proximity to Shondell.
Little girl was afraid. She was afraid that he was going to try and kill one of us. She was afraid.
Especially when they were yelling threats. She's like, how can I sleep now?
What is going on? Why are these people like this?
You know, I hope that as he spends the rest of his life in jail, that he comes to terms with it and does value human life, and that there is some redemption for him at some point. But that's totally up to him. And for his family to say to us, "We hate you," what's that all about?
In contrast, Derek, Shondell's partner in the crime, chose to plead guilty for his role. He received a sentence of only 12 years in prison. Surprisingly, despite the gravity of Shondell's actions, there are individuals who argue that his sentence was overly severe and that his young age warrants a second opportunity for rehabilitation.
When I saw it on the news, I even cried. I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine what that mother is going through. I never had a clue that my child had anything to do with it. My son is not a monster. He is not a monster.
Currently, he is incarcerated and expected to spend the remainder of his life in prison. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Watch this next.